Thank you for joining us at this time. Please welcome Tulane University student Claire Romaine.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural Dr. Regina Benjamin Distinguished Lecture Series. My name is Claire Romaine, and I am an MPH student in the Department of Environmental Health Sciences studying disaster management, as well as an MD candidate at the School of Medicine. On behalf of the student body of Tulane University, I want to thank our special guest, Dr. Regina Benjamin, for being here tonight. Toward the end of the lecture, audience participants will be able to ask questions at the designated microphone. To begin tonight's program, it is my pleasure to introduce you to the 15th president of Tulane University, Michael A. Fitz.
So thank you, Claire, and welcome to everyone. Welcome to our inaugural lecture series honoring Tulane's iconic Trailblazer, a 1991 graduate of the A.B. Freeman School of Business, a public health rock star, and the 18th Surgeon General of the United States, Dr. Regina Benjamin. In April of 2019, we established the Trailblazers initiative to recognize and celebrate Tulaneans from diverse backgrounds, those who have paved the way to the university becoming more equitable, diverse, and inclusive. Our honorees span decades, schools, programs, and centers, and each have played a critically important role in shaping Tulane University and the world. But this is a special night for several reasons. This is our first Trailblazers event shared by two schools, the A.B. Freeman School of Business, who proudly counts Dr. Benjamin as a graduate of its MBA program, and the School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine. It's also special because Dr. Benjamin stands out, even among our pantheon of extraordinary Tulane Trailblazers. Each of our honorees have had an outsized impact on the university. All have opened doors for others to help realize the dream of a Tulane education. But very few of our Trailblazers have had the type of impact that stems from Dr. Benjamin's life and career. Since graduating from Tulane, Dr. Benjamin has become a global leader in advancing preventive health, fighting health disparities, and developing innovative community-based systems of care, most notably as the founder and CEO of the Rural Bayou Clinic in Bayou La Batre, Alabama. 4 years after receiving her MBA at Tulane, Dr. Benjamin was named to the American Medical Association's Board of Trustees, making her both the first physician under the age of 40 and the first African-American woman to be so elected. I could stop there and we would be recognizing one of the most impactful Tulaneans in recent memory, but Dr. Benjamin was far from done. She took to heart the concept of growth mindset and kept pushing for equity, access, and innovative care. In 2002, she became the first African-American female president of a state medical society in her home state of Alabama. Her genius was later recognized formally as a MacArthur Fellow, but in a strange twist of fate, we're all lucky she couldn't complete her grant. Let me remind you, government officials cannot receive a MacArthur Fellowship. And less than 1 year after the MacArthur announcement, President Barack Obama made his choice for the 18th Surgeon General of the United States. His choice, of course, was our very own Dr. Benjamin, who was unanimously confirmed by the Senate, not something you see very often. At Tulane, we still call her America's doctor, and she truly embodied that moniker as Surgeon General. Part of Dr. Benjamin's genius is her incredibly unique and diverse perspective. She's a national policymaker and champion for health equity, of course, but she served on the nation's largest stage while staying true to her roots as a community practitioner, truly not for oneself, but for one's own. And for those of you who sat then and spoken with her, she truly cares about the individuals who serve by our medical system. She dedicated her life to that. She never lost sight of the individual nature of public health and preventive care. This is the definition of a trailblazer, leading, opening doors for others, and never forgetting who you are and the lives that you can change. Fast forward nearly a decade after stepping down as Surgeon General, and Dr. Benjamin continues blazing a trail of equitable care and public health awareness. As the world grappled with the pandemic, I personally felt incredibly fortunate to have her join the board of Tulane to help guide our university through an unprecedented era. I can't tell you the numbers of times I called her up asking for advice. Let me just say, seeing one of the world's leading public health experts on your board Zoom call in the middle of a pandemic was a sight for sore eyes. She commands the attention of any room she enters, virtual or in person. Since its development, Dr. Benjamin has been a national driving force in promoting access to the COVID-19 vaccine, a passion she shares with our impresario for this evening, Dr. Thomas Levis, Dean of the School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine, and Tulane's Weatherhead Presidential Chair in Health Equity. Let me just say, our School of Public Health, the oldest in the nation, has a motto of "on the front lines." And I can't think of a Tulanean whose life and career have personified that slogan more than Dr. Regina Benjamin. I won't take too much of your time. We have an incredible program this evening featuring a conversation with Dr. Benjamin and Dean Levis. But before I hand the podium over, let me thank you, Dr. Benjamin. Thank you for serving the nation and the world with such care and passion. Thank you for inspiring generations of Tulaneans, those who see your name amongst our graduates and can dream a little bigger. And thank you for lending your name and prestige to this lectureship and for serving as its first, and I suspect its most famous, guest of honor. Let's have a round of applause. So before the convocation begins, let me welcome someone who joined the Tulane community just 1 month after Dr. Benjamin was named to our board. He's fond of saying that Tulane was the perfect job for him, and I think he is the perfect dean for Tulane. So please join me in welcoming Paulo Gois, Dean of the A.B. Freeman School of Business.
Thank you, President Fitz. Good evening, everyone. I'm Paulo Gois. I'm the Dean of the Freeman School of Business. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural Dr. Regina Benjamin Distinguished Lecture and to introduce our very special speaker, Dr. Regina Benjamin. President Fitz shared some of the highlights from Dr. Benjamin's inspiring and very accomplished medical and public health career with you. But I'd like to take a moment to discuss her business career. In 1990, shortly after completing her residency, Dr. Benjamin founded a clinic in Beulah Battery, Alabama, an impoverished fishing community on the Gulf of Mexico, desperately in need of healthcare services. As CEO of the Beulah Battery Rural Health Clinic, Dr. Benjamin provided high-quality care to her patients regardless of their economic circumstances. As President Obama said when he announced her nomination as Surgeon General, when people couldn't pay, she didn't charge them. When the clinic wasn't making money, she didn't take a salary for herself. What President Obama was thinking was, that's a challenging business model. To help her deliver more cost-efficient care to her patients, Dr. Benjamin enrolled in the Freeman School's Executive MBA program, an accelerated program for working executives and managers. For the next 18 months, she traveled from her home in Mobile to New Orleans twice a month to attend weekend classes at Tulane. But that wasn't all. She was also part of a student team that worked together on group projects. So once a week, she would drive 3 hours from Mobile to Baton Rouge to meet with her team, and then drive the 3 hours back to Mobile that same evening. Clearly, Dr. Benjamin was a dedicated and exceptionally driven person, qualities that would come to define her in her career as she rebuilt the clinic when it was destroyed by Hurricane George in 1998, was flooded by Hurricane Katrina in 2005, and then suffered a catastrophic fire in 2006. Throughout it all, she remained committed to using her medical knowledge, and I'd like to thank her business knowledge, to better serve the needs of her patients. She brought that same commitment to her role as Surgeon General, where she championed wellness and preventative care. And today she continues to be a tireless advocate for public health and the medical needs of the poor and the underserved. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Regina Benjamin and Dean Thomas Levist, Dean of the Tulane School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine, to the stage. Thank you.
Okay, well, good evening.
Hi there. Hello.
So, in this formal setting, I know what I would normally call you. What should I call you? Should I call you General, Surgeon General, or what?
As they always say, in time for dinner.
Call you.
No, not General. One of the things that people don't realize as Surgeon General is that that is the title, Surgeon General. I'm actually a 3-star admiral, so it's Admiral Benjamin, not General.
Okay.
And we are admiral because I headed up the United States Public Health Service, and 2,500 officers under my command are stationed around the world to protect the public. Just like the Navy protects our shores and the Air Force protects our air, we protect the public's health. So those officers, all of them who have a degree in some sort of health or public health or medicine or nursing, but they're scattered around the world to protect the public's health.
So tell me about the job. Some of the questions I get sometimes suggest to me that people don't really understand what the Surgeon General does. So talk a bit about that. What does the Surgeon General do?
So there are two roles. One is, as I just described, as the role of the leader of the United States Public Health Service. And in that rank, as I said, I was a 3-star admiral, and the only person that outranked me was President Obama. So there was no one else higher. That's one role. And you'll see our officers in health departments, in NIH, CDC, different places, EIS, which is the surveillance officers. But the other role is as America's doctor, and that as the person on the cigarette package, so don't smoke. And we're basically to give the public the best information, scientific information that's available at that moment in time, and also to promote and protect the public's health.
Mm-hmm. Ever felt tempted to call in an airstrike or something as an admiral?
No, but we're the only branch of the military that doesn't carry a gun, but we'll shoot you with a needle.
All right. So
let me clarify a little bit of something that was said about the MacArthur Genius Award. This is for the business students. I was able to keep the MacArthur Award when I went into government. I just couldn't keep the money. So it was like I needed the money for the clinic, but they wouldn't let me.
So to the clinic. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up? What were your inspirations there? What led you to become a physician?
So I always say it's divine intervention. To become a physician, I had a little conversation with the students a few minutes ago, and I was telling them that I'd never seen a black doctor before I got to Xavier in New Orleans. So I didn't know I could be a doctor. It just wasn't in my thought process. I never thought I couldn't, it just never, it's never an issue. So it's important that you be a mentor and you be someone that people can see in what you're doing, because they'll look up to you. I grew up in a little town called Daphne, Alabama, and graduated from Fairhope High School. It's a little small rural town on the other side of Mobile, and very involved in Catholic healthcare, which we can talk about if you want later. But my grandmother was, when my mother, who was a twin, she and her twin brother were growing up, they had to sit in the back of the church because blacks in those days had to sit in the back of the church. And so my grandmother decided to get someone to donate some property and start a Catholic church, a mission for blacks. And so they started this church, and that church has now become, well, it's a major church in town. And when they were raising money, they had what we call lawn parties to raise money, and they brought the Sisters of Mercy came and helped do these, raise money. And so that's how the Sisters of Mercy got introduced to that part of the Eastern Shore of Mobile. And they started what is a nursing home, or we now call it continuum of care. And when I went into practice, I went on that board. And later, by being on that board, I served on a board for a Catholic health system, which was the Eastern Mercy Health System, which is now Catholic Health East or something. It's Trinity. And so anyway, it went full circle, and then I became on Catholic Health Association board, so full circle. But I just will say about growing up in a town, everything is local. So I had been in Time magazine, I had been a number of things, in the AMA and all these other things in the paper. But one day my mother called me at work, and she never called me at work, so I thought something was wrong. And she says, "Regina, you must be important. You're on Mercy Medical Board." None of that other stuff mattered. Just being on that local board mattered. But I grew up in a family that always wanted to make a difference, and particularly my grandmother, who wanted to get things done. And she was a landowner, so if somebody, and we often had people in the community who would be put in jail or something, sometimes rightly, and oftentimes not, but she would sign their bonds and get their kids out of jail and stuff like that. So I grew up with that. So that was kind of the way I grew up.
How would you say that shaped you and ultimately what you've come to do in your career?
Just making a difference. You can make a difference, and something needs to be done, you do it. You're part of a community. I always was part of a community. I'm related to everybody, but those I'm not related to, still, you're part of that community, and something needs to be done, you just step up and do it.
So, I feel like I've come to learn so much about you just in the last few weeks. We were talking earlier about your involvement with Catholic healthcare. I was formerly on a board of a Catholic health system as well. It was quite an eye-opening experience. Talk a little bit about that, about Catholic health, and what is it all about, and how do you see it as different than other aspects of healthcare?
Yeah, one of the students had asked me, how did I handle that kind of question? Because media always asks the question. And when I was going through nomination and stuff, you have to go through these not hearings, but you basically have to, you're challenged about everything. So one of my challenges was, okay, you have an award from the Pope, but President Obama is pro-choice. And they tried to make a big deal of it, but Catholic Health Association and some of our Archbishop and others kind of came to my defense. But I'm always asked that question, and I truly believe that a woman has the right to make her own decisions. I think every person has a right to make their own decisions, and I shouldn't take those rights from them. Adam and Eve had those rights. But that doesn't mean that I'm pro-abortion. And pro-abortion and believing the person has the rights are not the same. And people try to blend them together, and you don't have to be one or the other. I think it's important that you give people the good information. Hopefully they'll make the best decisions, but it's their decision. And when I was Surgeon General, I represented everyone, whether they believed what I believed or not, but I respect whatever their decisions are.
So we're here to celebrate you as a Tulanean and you're as an alumnus of this institution, but you're also an alumnus of Xavier University and Morehouse Medical College. It's okay to woohoo for Xavier, it's fine.
Yes! I'm actually currently the endowed chair in public health sciences at Xavier, so they give me my
Okay, we don't want to promote
paycheck.
Xavier too much now. But both are historically black colleges. So talk to me about that decision to attend those institutions specifically. And
So, you know, growing up, like I said, I never seen a black doctor. And when I was applying for college, my brother went to college. He went to University of Montana and then Stanford, and it was a long way away. And I knew I wanted to go to college. I had no idea where. So when I was taking my SAT, y'all gonna think this is a dumb story, but anyway, I was taking my SAT, and you had to, you know, as a list, you check off what you want to be. So I went down the list and I checked off international lawyer. I didn't know what it was, but it sounded interesting, so I checked it off. So then I mailed the application off, and I said, well, if I'm gonna be an international lawyer, I need to go to law school. And I'd only heard of one law school, and I don't know how I heard of it, but it was Yale. So I applied to Yale, and I got this letter back. It was just a short letter that says, thank you for your application, a rejection letter, of course. Thank you for your letter. Thank you for your application. We strongly encourage you to go to college first. So I said, well, I guess I won't be a lawyer. So everything's kind of divine intervention. And growing up Catholic, Xavier was a Catholic university. And so I applied to Xavier. My mother said she grew up, she always wanted to go to Xavier. So, and they had a summer program for pre-med students to get you interested in medicine. So I went to the summer program. And it's all divine intervention. So if that program wasn't there, I probably would never have gotten there. And I just, you know, Xavier was kind of place where some places partying is a big deal. You know, New Orleans, we had the whole city, so we didn't have to party on Saturday night. We could party any night of the week. So, but it was mainly that you had to perform. And so we were competing, and we would go to, had to take Newsweek and Time magazine to keep up with current events so that we practice and stuff. And so I, did fine and the most popular club was pre-med. So I'm a joiner, and I joined pre-med and Delta Sigma Theta if there's any of you out there, so. And big sorority type thing. I'm a people person, so. But that was the biggest thing, and so keeping that up, and then people would come on campuses, and then they would interview us and stuff, and they told us to interview with these companies just to get practice before you interviewing for medical school. So I did, and I actually got second interview and a third interview with the CIA. And I'd never been to Washington, so I went there and ended up doing an internship.
So in your clinical practice, you're noted for being quite a unique physician in many ways, because even though you don't have formal training in public health, which you certainly have performed as if you were a public healther. I mean, you actually practiced in that way. Where did that come from,
I think it came from, just being in healthcare. When I went to Morehouse School of Medicine, Dr. David Satcher taught me community medicine. And he would have us all go out to these little towns and spend a couple of days with these doctors, and we had to learn all the population health and all this stuff, and I thought that was normal. I thought everybody got that. So we got public health as part of our basic family medicine, community medicine. And so it was just kind of part of, what I grew up learning. And being in the second class, we had a lot of those civil rights historians who were there, part of us. Dr. Benjamin Mays would be this older guy that would sit next to us every time. Like, I don't know who he is, but he was important. Later, I learned how famous and important he was to civil rights, and Andy Young, all these people. But we grew up learning population health, public health. And then when I was at the Medical Association in Alabama, we wore 3 hats. We were the board of the Medical Association. We were also the licensing board, which licensed and disciplined doctors, but we were also the state committee of public health. We hire and fire the state health officer, unlike most other states. And so public health was everything we did. Every 3rd Tuesday of the month, I was in Montgomery doing public health. So I kind of learned it by having to do it. I remember going when I was in practice, just trying to, the bayou, and many of you know what a bayou is, it's like a river that doesn't have a beginning, but the bayou, Bayou Battery is a shrimping town, made famous by Forrest Gump. And it was just, the water was black. It was just, and so my nurse and I kept asking the shrimpers, you know, how do you change the oil in the shrimp boats? Well, they say they take the oil out the shrimp boat and bump it in the water, add some more oil in the boat. So I tried to get, you know, all the different agencies. The EPA said it wasn't their problem. They said it was somebody else's problem. Whatever, the health department said it wasn't theirs, it was somebody. So we just got some barrels and put on the piers and asked the shrimpers to put it in. They weren't trying to pollute the water, they just hadn't thought about it. So they started putting the oil in those barrels and the water started clearing up. And it was like, that was a simple solution, a public health issue that didn't take much. Didn't take money, didn't take a policy, didn't take a law, just do it. And so just kind of learning those kind of things around public health was.
Yeah, that's quite unique, unfortunately, that more people don't practice that way. So let's shift.
Well, let me tell you how I got to biobattery. You didn't ask me that part, because
right.
I'm telling you all these other things. You know, when I was, and this is more for medical students and stuff, when I was an intern, first year out of medical school, I attended the Medical Association of Georgia, where I did my residency. I attended one of their annual meeting, and one of the things that they were discussing in a room with maybe 10 or 12 people was that sexually transmitted diseases needed to be taught in medical school. So I stood up in front of this group, and spoke to that issue. Like I said, about 10 or 12 people in the room, and I said, there's a need. I hadn't seen certain diseases except in a textbook, and I thought there was a need. So they passed a resolution, and they forwarded that resolution to the AMA. And then the Georgia delegation took me to the American Medical Association to speak to the same issue, and it passed. And within 6 months, every medical school in this country was encouraged to include sexually transmitted diseases as part of their core curriculum. And I learned that one person can make a difference, whether it's in medical policy or in medical practice. And I learned I could make a difference in medical practice when the National Health Service Corps sent me to Biobattery. As I told you, it's a pretty place, but it's a poor place. And I like the people, but I like the community, and I wanted to practice medicine there. You know, the people were hardworking people, too poor to afford medical care, but too rich to qualify for Medicaid. So when I got there, I wanted to be there and to make a difference there. And so I stayed, and I learned, you know, their problems were not just what I could call sewing up the shark bites. I had to deal with the land sharks, the regulators, the reviewers, the red tape dispensers, not realizing I'd become one of those regulators. But just being there, and they had problems that the prescription pad wasn't enough to take care of, like the clean water, like literacy, and just learn, you know, a large proportion didn't know how to read. Things that needed to be addressed if I was really going to improve the health of that community. So.
Yeah. So speaking of one person making a difference, you and I have in common somebody that we both admire greatly and inspire us. That is former Secretary of Health, Louis Sullivan. So talk a little bit about him and how he has impacted you.
So Dr. Sullivan is, I don't know what number he was, but he was the Secretary of Health under President George Bush,
yeah.
Sr. And Dr. Sullivan has been a mentor and more like a father figure for me for years. But the way I got to know him is that at Morehouse School of Medicine, he was the first dean. And he taught me hematology. Real boring, but he put us to sleep. Everybody knows. But he taught us hematology, and then he was the first dean and then president of Morehouse School of Medicine. But as we were going through Morehouse in those couple of years, and it was a new school, we also learned all the things around putting a school together, a new school. It's kind of entrepreneurial. I was in the second class. And so everything you'd find about the startup or being an entrepreneur was at that school and going through the challenges of it. So he kind of guided us, and so he would bring us, and his wife we'd have dinner at their house on Sundays and things like that, and all those things. But I grew up with him. And then when he went to become Secretary of Health, I had finished residency and I needed to go and do my payback time for the National Health Service Corps. And they didn't want me to go to places I wanted to go. So I called his office, and his secretary happened to be the secretary that was at school. So I knew somebody there. And I said, I need to go to an underserved community. I don't need to go to an inner city place, which, anyway, but I learned that I could call somebody and I could talk to them and I could get places and get things done. And through the years, it has really helped to be able to have those connections. And one of the things I told students is that you work with your friends and people you know. One of the students asked about alumni, is it important? And I think it's very important when you keep in touch with your friends, you have this connection. If I called, in a place and as an investor or something, I walk in a room and I tell them I'm a Tulane graduate and they're a Tulane graduate too. There's that instant connection there that you have something in common. You also may have had the same professors, and you may have, you knew how hard that class was, the things like that. So, but Dr. Sullivan has been a very big help. He introduced me to the Bush family, and Jeb Bush put me on my first board, and just through the years, it's just been really, and taught us about health equity too, as well. So that was why they started that school.
Yeah, well, he did much more than that. We could have a whole session on him alone. So it's almost like you anticipated my next question. We talked about everything almost except for Tulane. So tell us about your Tulane story, and what Tulane has meant in your career.
So I decided to start this little clinic, and as I said, my boyfriend at the time was a contractor, and we were I rented this storefront. So it was too big, so we used half of it and I had him build out the clinical services and in a little room for the lady to accept people and, take their insurance card and whatever and send them back. And a salesman came by and asked, where are you gonna put your copy machine and the business stuff? And I'm like, what copy machine, what business? I only knew the clinical side of medicine, I'd never seen that. And I got this card thing in the mail, and it was for Tulane Executive MBA. And I said, I don't know anything about business, maybe I ought to check into this. So it's only less than 2 years, so I could just do that. And I get to here, well, not to the fancy new building over there now, but to our building. And, I got accepted. I had to take that, some kind of exam, some LSAT or something. Yeah, GMAT. And it was all children. They were so young. I'm like, oh my God. And I had no idea if I passed or not, but I got accepted. And so when I started, business school was much harder than medical school ever was. It was hard. because they spoke a different language. I had no idea what they were talking about. It was just hard. And again, except when we got to stuff about statistics and stuff, because we'd gotten that in medicine. We just didn't call it statistics. We'd gotten those sort of things, but everything else was just a whole different language. And I was struggling, but I was still working. And I don't know if Rob is still here. Haley was in my class. He was part of my team. And they carried me through. But he reminded me that I also ran a nightclub at the time. And I'd forgotten about that. Some things you want to forget. When you make a bad investment, you want to forget. So I was trying to keep it going and then trying to make it pay for the clinic and all these things. And so my team was helping me with all of this. And every time I'd come back from business school to my office staff would say, what else you got us to do now? Like, I want you to implement this. Every 2 weeks, I'd come back with a whole different things for them to implement. And they expected it. And it was like our own little experiment as we were going. But they did carry me through because it was tough. And I was moonlighting and doing all these other things at the same time. But it was worth it because I was trying to figure out how to deliver affordable health care to a community that really didn't have the means. And my whole goal was I want to give them good quality care and make it affordable. And I've been trying to do that ever since. We're still trying to do that in the whole country. And someday we'll get there, but that's what we're trying. But the business school was probably the best decision I ever made for a lot of different reasons. But later I started serving on boards and I knew how to read a balance sheet, stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we have a microphone here at the center. If anyone in the audience wants to ask a question, please come up to the mic. And while you all do that, I had another question to ask you about that. So you have an MBA, regrettably not an MPH, but an MBA. It's okay. Although I think you have an MPH. You just
You
don't
could give
have-
me one.
We can.
He could, couldn't he?
Well, let's take that under advisement. I'll talk to some of my staff and see what we can come up with. Let's talk about the private sector. I mean, I've always said, if we could harness the power of capitalism for the public, for the good of the public's health, that would be such a powerful force. But most commonly, actually, the private sector is more likely to be engaging in activities that harms the public health. What would you say is the role of the public sector in health equity, and how can we use the public health, the private sector, to improve the public's health?
So after I left office and came back to the clinic, and I had to get the clinic going because I was a sole, I should say, provider for the clinic. So I was doing speeches, doing different things, trying to make money for the clinic. One of the things I started doing was serving on boards and being in the corporate board rooms. And in being there, I realized that a lot of healthcare decisions are made at the boardroom. And I served on nonprofit boards like Robert Wood Johnson and some others, and then I started serving on some corporate boards and public boards, public company boards. And a lot of it was, it really is made at that board level, and we needed to have a seat at the table. And again, my MBA really helped me understand the languages they were speaking, the reading of financial statements, but I also served on audit committees and things to continue to learning that. And that was for a little while. I mean, I'm still on those boards, different boards. But then I realized that, these boards are there, but there's also investors. And many of these boards are trying to please their investors, or in the case of public boards, the investors is the public, and so public investments. And so I wanted to learn about what they were doing. And again, the business part came into play. And so now I'm more involved in venture and in making investments. I'm a general partner in a fund-to-fund where we fund other funds that are focused on women, minorities, LGBT, and disabled, because they're often hard to close their first close, so we call it first close partners. And so we invest in them so that we can give them access to capital. And all of that is using that business degree. And to bring it full circle around healthcare, because everything I do is healthcare, is I want to be on those boards or making those investments in organizations or companies that are going to make sure that they treat the people that I treat. I mean, they're going to serve those patients that I treat, and that they don't leave them out. They don't forget about them. It's very easy for a company that wants to move to scale to just go where the big dollars are and forget about the others. And so I wanted to make sure I have that voice at that table. So in government, you know, well, growing up, I thought as a doctor, that one-on-one to me is the best thing there is. There's nothing like that. But that was the way to make the biggest difference. And it is a way to make a difference, but then when I went in government, I learned I had 300 million Americans as my patients, and so that was a bigger impact. But government felt like you can solve every healthcare problem with a regulation or a rule or a law, and you can't. It's a good start and it's helpful, but I was like, that's not enough for us to solve our healthcare problems. When I went into on the boards, the corporate boards were like, okay, we can do things with our companies and things, but many of the companies, particularly were in Silicon Valley, and I do a lot in digital health right now, and they thought, well, if you just do technology, we can solve all of healthcare problems with technology. Well, we can't. It helps, but we can't. And the investors also felt like, well, if you throw enough money at a problem, it'll fix it. And in healthcare, that doesn't work either. What I've learned is you got to put them all together. And to me, what I've done with this business degree is being able to bring them all together and start to try to bring it together and figure out how we all can work holistically and start to solve our problems. And our problems are holistic problems. We can't piecemeal them. And so that's why I think the medicine and the business really go together. And I like the fact that many of the students here are understanding that, you know, we weren't that wise when I was growing up, but you guys are smarter. And so you have that opportunity to interact with each other and start to solve some of our healthcare problems.
So while you were Surgeon General, well, actually, I'm not sure if you were Surgeon General at the time, but you led the National Prevention Strategy for the Affordable Care Act. Now, a lot's happened to the ACA since its original implementation. What are your thoughts about how things have evolved with the ACA and its potential to realize the vision that President Obama had?
Remember, some of these young kids are very young. They might not remember that far back to Affordable Care Act. But there was a time, which is unfortunately still here now again, where access to care was a real problem, and it's sadly come back around. We had 40 million Americans who didn't have insurance and didn't have access to care, and we've been trying to solve that, and the Affordable Care Act was a good start. And it brought in things like preventive care and made sure that the insurance companies covered what they said they were covering. And one of the things out of that was the National Prevention Council. And as Surgeon General, I got to lead that council. And it was made up of 17 cabinet level heads. And it's the first time in government's history that many secretaries or leaders of the cabinet members sat down ever to talk about prevention. And so they were part of my council, and we released the first ever National Prevention Strategy, which is a roadmap to how to have a national prevention strategy. Many places it's called different things. It's still being used. It's called Healthy Chicago in Chicago. I think San Diego has a name for it. The country of Sweden is using it, but they call it whatever they want to call it. But it's basically encompasses a holistic approach, because healthcare doesn't occur just in the doctor's office. I always say it occurs where we live, where we learn, where we work, where we play, where we pray. It's in everything that we do. And so in addition to a very state-of-the-art medicine, we also have to treat the other parts of medicine and the other things that influence our health, like clean air, clean water, healthy roads. We have to give you healthy foods and all those things that we now kind of lump into the social determinants of health if we're going to actually improve our health. And so the National Prevention Strategy is kind of a roadmap on how to do that, and it encompasses all forms of the community, the business, the government, the philanthropic area, the individuals, everyone is involved in that. So we have to take that holistic approach.
And just a quick one here. What would you say was the most controversial issue you faced as Surgeon General?
Controversial? Well, there was so much stuff around the Affordable Care Act at the time that anything around me was minor. I mean, it was like nothing. I didn't really have anything that was particularly controversial because I, kind of stuck to my guns. I had things that were difficult, and I think probably the most difficult thing was the first time it happened. But we had the earthquake in Haiti. And when the earthquake in Haiti happened, one of my officers was in a building that collapsed and died. And I had to talk to her family, and I spoke at her funeral. That was really difficult for this young officer to have died in the line of duty, which was tough.
Yeah. So thank you for that, and thank you for lending us your name for this new lecture series.
It's a true honor. You can't imagine what it's like to hear your name out there for something. It's just surreal. It's really an honor. So I want to just say thank you. It lets me know I'm getting old.
Well, I'd say let you know you've done a lot, and we're all proud that you are a fellow Tulanean. And speaking of fellow Tulaneans, I'd like to invite the president to come back up. I understand he has a presentation he'd like to.
Do we have any questions? Did we ask any questions?
No
I
one-
kept talking.
no
Any
one-
questions?
No one came to the microphone when I invited them up.
Sorry, I have a quick question, real quick. So within your career, you worked a lot with the elderly population, and a big problem that I've seen as a healthcare worker, the elderly population being poor quality of living within continued care facilities and within nursing homes. So what would be your thoughts on ensuring quality care within those type of facilities?
I am a fan of regulation, and that's an area that regulation can serve a major purpose. I do like treating elderly patients, and I moonlighted in nursing homes to keep the clinic going for years. And we have to be their voices, and we have to be their protectors, because people, if you let them get away with it, they are going to get away with it. So you have to regulate it and make sure somebody's watching, make sure somebody's taking care of them, and not tossing them aside and just taking for granted. And it's going to be us one day, or it's your grandmother or your grandfather, and everyone deserves dignity. And oftentimes it's said, you judge a society by the way it treats its elderly and its children. And so we should acknowledge our elderly, learn from them, and respect them and treat them well. But I think the more regulation into somebody to stay on top of it, to make sure they're getting the things they need and not being exploited.
Thank you.
I think we can take one more question. Yeah, that's you.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Nicholas Presley. I'm currently a graduate student at the School of Public Health.
Great,
I also went to HBCU as well. I went to Tougaloo College.
great.
The question that I had for you was, being that you've so accomplished in everything, how was it being a Black woman in certain spaces? How were you able to navigate those spaces, being a Black woman?
Oh, it helped. It gave me strength, it makes me different. It makes me, in many of those settings, because the first, early on, was at the AMA, just being the first person under 40, you just being in the room. That was strength. Being a minority woman also helped me know who I am and what I can bring to the table, because I could bring different perspectives, and that was really strong. It's sort of just kind of a sense of who I am and what makes me, it's sort of like being in New Orleans, it's like gumbo, I'm not rice, I'm not okra, I'm not whatever. You put it all together and it makes it who you are when it blends. And so my background, it really, I get to call on my ancestors, call on those strengths, but it's also a sense of pride. But the other part of it, which I want to make sure you guys understand, is that you never know who's watching you. Young kids, people are watching you, and just being there matters. And so I remember a couple of stories. One is I remember being at the AMA, and I was in this boardroom where we had the big meeting outside in the convention center, and we had a boardroom that was like we'd leave our stuff on the table and we'd come back and meeting. It's one of those boardrooms where it's huge and people sit around us, had the microphones there. I went back to pick up something off the table between meetings, and there was a janitor, a black janitor, elderly guy who was cleaning up, and he said to me, "Ma'am, can I say something to you?" I'm like, "Sure." He says, "I want you to know we know you're here. I'm very proud of you. I even told my grandkids about you. You never know who's watching." And another time was when I had my picture in the paper. I think it was Time magazine, and this little kid says, and I got media people call, and they'll always ask you the same question. I'm like, just read it, it's the same question. And I would be annoyed until one day I got an envelope in the mail, a manila envelope filled with letters from a second grade class. And each one of them said, "I want to be a doctor just like you." And I realized my being in the paper had nothing to do with me. It had to do with if one of those kids become a doctor. And what I do matters to them. You never know who's watching you. Your little cousins, your folks are going to be looking at you because you're the one with the degree, and you owe it to them to do your best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, on that,
So first let me say we're proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
And let me also note, we talk about Trailblazers, and I hope everybody appreciated, as Dr. Benjamin went through all of her different parts of her life, not only a trailblazer, but at each part, you really impacted the world around you, leading to being the Surgeon General of the United States, impacting the health of our country, but remained the sort of the doctor. I can feel it in you as the doctor. So the question is, what do you give somebody who has over 30 honorary degrees, including an honorary degree from Tulane University, incredible number of awards, including, I think, Women of the Year from People magazine. But we wanted to give you the Trailblazers medallion. You really honored us not only giving this lecture, but also being able to name it after you. So forever in history, as we come to Tulane, they will forever be linked with you and your extraordinary career. So let's have another round of applause.
That was wonderful. That was wonderful.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all. Thank you.
So what an inspirational conversation. As Dean of the Business School, I have to acknowledge the fact that a business school is harder than a medical school. So I think the
Only
bar
because, only
has been
because she didn't go to a public health school.
I knew
the
better.
bar has been set high by Dr. Benjamin, but that's fair because all the lectures that are coming after are part of the Benjamin series. So I think this inaugural event has planted the seeds for our collaboration between business and public health to really make society a better place. I'd like to say that this is very exciting. I think we are on to something very special here. I'd like to acknowledge and thank all the organizers, especially the two people who worked the hardest to put this together, Professors Harish Sujan and Kenneth Oriam. Harish. And we'll see you next year with a continuation of this great series. Thank you.
Thank you.